Welcome to the first talk of the symposium. We have Dr. Neeraja Sundaram from Azim Premji University in Bangalore. She is an alumna of the department and has been at IW online events before as well. If I may formally introduce her to the audience, Neeraja Sundaram teaches literature at the School of Arts and Sciences, Azim Premji University. Her research lies at the intersection of literature and the health humanities, and as such is interested in new kinds of voices and identities that emerge when we pay attention to healthcare as a site of storytelling. She is also interested in developing sites of engagement for students and teachers in India, in English literature, and in emerging fields like the health humanities, which have a stronger presence in American and European contexts. Her recent book, English Romantic Literature, part of Orion Black Swan's Literary Context series, aims to provide accessible introductions to teaching and learning key periods in English writing. With this, may I invite Professor Sundaram for a talk.
Thank you so much, Atul. I want to begin by thanking the organizers for this invitation. I'm really grateful to continue to be included, to be a part of this very exciting new venture. Professors Anna Kurian and Pramod Nair are beloved and inspiring teachers. I was going to say were beloved and inspiring teachers and thought about how that would make it seem like they aren't anymore. Right? And so I at least wanted to start by saying, please, yeah, don't stop the long cons and the many schemes because, yeah, I think I'm a very grateful recipient of it, as have been, I think, many generations of students. So I just wanted to start with that. I have organized my talk in terms of say broad theoretical frames that we can think of that that inform the study of something like graphic medicine. While it seems new, like with many things that are new, it has bits of the old and it has parts of things that have come before, and so we'll talk a little about what those things are. And then I'd like to move into a set of conceptual maybe frames, right? What are the kinds of things to pay attention to when you're reading a text like this, and how can you then pay close attention to that and allow the text to sort of take you in directions of some kinds of questioning. And then I'll end with a few examples different from the ones that we'll discuss in more detail later this afternoon. So I know that all of you have read the text that was also available on the OER quite amazingly, because the long form anthology now is very difficult to get a hold of. So in that sense, it's great that it's up on the OER as well. But I have a couple of other instances of graphic text that deal with illness that we can talk about. Okay, so to begin with, I have this image here, which is an image that some of you may know if you know Rita Charan's narrative medicine. This is the image that is on the text, where it's a field that kind of inaugurates this question. The image is called the conversation. It's something I've always seen but never paid attention to very closely. So I thought that we could begin with this image in order to begin talking about narrative medicine, which in some sense is a location where we can begin as a place that informs the study of graphic medicine. You can see from the image that the book actually inaugurates a new kind of moment in thinking about medical practice, where there is a great focus on the conversation, the interaction between the patient and the doctor, as being something that is comfortable, as being something that is perhaps even intimate, a place that is not frightening or intimidating, but rather a space in which you invite someone to talk about not just the disease or illness they're presenting with, but actually perhaps a little bit about their lives. So it's a field that really focuses a great deal on storytelling. So Professor Gansham actually did a very nice introduction for me by talking about story, and a story is very much at the heart of narrative medicine, where there's a focus on interpretation and understanding and recording individual experience. So a lot of focus on the individual, what the individual is actually saying, and there is this emphasis on the doctor actually not participating in a diagnostic moment. It's not about identifying only what this illness is that the person is coming with, but rather you're interpreting the story that the person is telling you. right? So this is now an established part of medical curriculum, which means that it's something that a doctor cannot you cannot enter the professional practice of medicine without actually having been certified in narrative medicine. The role here, of course, being that you are made a more empathetic person and a more reflective carer, right? You're more aware of the larger context in which your patient is coming to you from. Uh, while this is a very sort of, uh, quick overview of this broad field of narrative medicine, what I wanted you to maybe focus on really is the um, renewed interest in storytelling that comes up in this field, right? Where a lot of the terms will be very recognizable to you as English studies scholars, even though some of you might think that the context of medicine is something so far removed, um, for you in terms of its terminology, in terms of its, technicalities. Storytelling is very much at the core of a lot of the theory that is, written within this field. Now, what does that mean? And we'll talk about some of these storytelling terms, but I want to take you to the next sort of, question of influence. So we start with narrative medicine as one kind of, moment of, inaugurating this kind of interest in stories about individuals who are ill, not just as presenting symptoms, but as presenting actually a motivation for storytelling. And then there is a shift that occurs in more recent times. And, some of you must have, heard of the terms narrative medicine. You must have heard it sort of used interchangeably with medical humanities, also health humanities. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time just talking about the shift that happens from thinking of narrative medicine, where you may think of a focus on storytelling and narrative, towards, the health humanities and what that shift looks like. I've organized the shift in some kind of ways, right? Within narrative medicine, also, there are questions that are asked, which are standard questions that you ask of storytelling within English studies. Who is the author here? Who authors? Who has the right to author a story of, a particular experience that's narrated? Within the health humanities, the question is framed as what happens if we move outside the domain of the biomedical, the professional practice of medicine? What else do we have then, right? Who is speaking and who is authoring the experience if you move outside the medical context? And so, one kind of example that I can present to you is one that you already encountered with Professor Gansham, which is the experience of the carer, right? Many times, the experience of a chronic illness requires commitment and time from someone in the family who is caring for this individual, sometimes for the duration of their life. This is an individual that may not necessarily be trained in medicine. This is an individual that might be a family member. This is an individual that might even be someone who works in a paramedical field, right? A physiotherapist, okay, an occupational therapist, someone who kind of helps you return to, say, a condition of stability or a condition of health. And so, in health humanities, the shift in focus really happens from just the big sort of limelight on medicine, and moves into other allied areas where a lot of us experience health, interact with healthcare, and there is a lot of work that's done outside the site of the medical institution alone. Is this making sense so far, the shift? Okay. Right. So one of the kind of examples of questions that are asked here is, do carers produce stories of illness? And is there some way in which we can ask, questions about these stories? Is there some way that we can frame them, study them? What kinds of questions are important for someone like a carer? And naturally, the challenges that you face and the kind of way in which you frame your experience of illness would be very different than, say, an empathetic, trained professional doctor that's listening to someone presenting, a case of illness, right? So that's one example of, a shift in focus in, say, the kind of person who authors the illness experience. There are other kinds of shifts you can think of as well, other than the carer, in terms of someone who, say, is terminally ill. So you have, say, a completion of that narrative following this person's death, right? A kind of co-production of storytelling and meaning, rather than only kind of viewing the story as something that allows an individual who is already in a professional context become an even better carer, right? There are also questions asked about the sites of storytelling, right? Now, if we're moving away from medicine, what are some other kinds of concerns that health humanities comes to broaden the field, right? So some of the questions that they ask are, can we really and truly say, even in a global context, that medicine is the only determinant of health? That's almost never true, right? So with health humanities, the question that's being asked is that there is actually a much broader range of factors that we all are aware of in our cultural, social milieu, where medicine is really not the only determinant of health. So, some examples that you can think of are, in a country like India, you can think of parents' education, right? You can think of, your own education levels. You can think of the geographical location in which you live, which kind of, impacts your access to healthcare. There are so many other kinds of ways in which your experience of life, the work that you do, right? Your occupation has a big role to play in the kind of health outcomes that you have. So, with health humanities, you also see a moving away from medicine and a biomedical, intervention as the one big answer or solution to a state of not having good health. Okay. And the last thing that I have here with the shift in focus and with health humanities is that, and this is a concern that's commonly shared among the fields of narrative medicine and health humanities, is that you're really asking a question, right? If you're going to ask me what it is that we as English students are doing in a field like this, then really the question that you're asking is, how is health and wellness represented, right? How do you tell an enabling story of illness? Okay, we're all actually living in a world which is very saturated with images of illness and health. Okay, and I'll show you some of these images. But also, really, the question we are being asked to consider here is, how do you tell an enabling story of illness, right? What are some illuminating ways in which you can tell the story of illness? Let's say you have a story that is demonstrating some of the things we all recognize, which is the experience of having to meet someone because something is not right with you, and then struggling to communicate what it is that you're going through. Okay, and if you think of that experience, what are some of the ways in which that can be communicated such that all aspects of what it is that you're feeling, all aspects of what is not usually kind of seen or understood, how can you tell a story in which all of those aspects can also come to the fore? Okay, those are some kind of ways in which we can frame this part. I've also added a little bit here about formal and informal modes of communication, which I'm hoping today we can look at a little more. A lot of these stories are stories that are very much in the tenor of the kind that you also heard Professor Gansham share in the morning. There's almost no one that you there's almost no one that you can't meet and then ask them about something to do with their health or their family where they won't have something to tell you. So, in some sense, formal and informal modes you can think of as a formal professional discipline of medicine in which there are formal modes of representing the body, right? Now, there are these movements in which people are trying to make more inclusive anatomical representations, right? So, there are these, there are these repositories online where people are trying to have, artists are trying to illustrate, say, colored bodies, right? A non-European body that kind of is representing an anatomical illustration for a doctor to be educated. So you have formal modes, which are, institutionally specific, part of your professional training as a doctor. And then what we're interested in are these informal modes, right? The separation is an artificial one. And I've put it here just for you to be aware that we're not necessarily going to be looking at, a Gray's Anatomy illustration, right? But the informal mode is important because the informal mode, which is seen as informal from a professional formal setting, but for us, very much the part of our everyday experience of health and talking about it, that part is important because that's really where ideas about health, ideas about disease and wellness are all in some sense located. So for us, really, the texts that we look at are repositories of these kinds of experiences. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the next thing that I think of as an important frame for you to bear in mind. So we have the frames of narrative medicine, you have the frames of health humanities, their concerns with storytelling, their concerns with who speaks in the event of illness, and why someone should pay closer attention to them. And then now I want to move on to what are some broad sort of thematic, elements that link these kind of texts together. So if someone asked you the question, what counts as a text, right, in a corpus like this? So if you had to put together a set of things called graphic narratives about medicine, or just stories about illness, what would you put in? So I wanted to have a bit on just what are the kernel sort of themes here, right? So what are some abiding figures and features of these stories? I have a list here, and you can try and think back to some of the stories that you may know. You almost always have a very consistent interest in and engagement with sickness and illness in the story, right? Because many of you may have come across stories in which you have illness that is coming in some small way, right? You may have one character, right? Perhaps a very villainous character who also has a limp, or is in some sense punished because he's experiencing an illness. What I'm speaking about here are slightly different kinds of stories. So you can think of them broadly as maybe autobiographies, fictional stories, could even be visual media. But there are stories in which there is a very kind of abiding concern, or the entire story in some sense is consistently engaging with illness. There is a lot of featuring of medical institutions and establishments, right? So a lot of the story might engage in one, say, person's struggle with becoming educated as a doctor and eventually triumphing in that role. You may have the entire story in some sense, if you think of something like Metamorphosis, then you may have the whole story be about a person's just experience of suffering and illness, right? So you can think about, an example of a story that that also kind of sees these features present in them. So the story is usually motivated by an event of illness. You can imagine a story that's motivated by, say, an epidemic that strikes a town, and then a story is written about that. Or it might be an event of illness that strikes an individual, much like the story that you're going to read, that we're going to discuss this afternoon. It could be about an event of illness that really kind of, pushes a person aside. And so this is the motivation for storytelling. Like I said, you could have the stories organized as the person who is suffering or the person who is experiencing it talking about it themselves, in which case you're in the presence of a memoir or a testimony, someone who's telling all, right? I've been through cancer, I've been through the treatment of cancer, and now I'm actually telling you what that looks like from the inside. Okay, that's an example of someone who's writing, in the first person. You could have a fictional story, right? You could have a fictional story in which you have a setup in which, a town is being obliterated by disease, and there is a great deal of parallel with real world epidemics that you might know of, and yet in some sense there's a fictional framing in the story, right? And our focus today is going to be visual media, but you can also think, I was hoping that you could think of a visual media that you would also be very familiar with. Graphic narratives, yes, but also films, right? Films and television shows that you might watch in which the medical theme is a very strong and central one. And think about the ways that these stories frame a story of illness. How do you know that this is a medical themed drama? You often know because it's set in an emergency room, right? Rarely do you have stories in which there's a quiet little town in which, there's a doctor that's not really facing too much trouble. Or there are such stories, but they're, organized for, a variety of other things other than the medical experience alone, right? So think of your medical thriller, the emergency room, as a site of great crisis. Daily battles with disease is one, right? And then the doctor is this heroic, triumphant figure. So what I'm kind of, giving you a spread of are, the kind of characters, places, events, and then narrative features that are all a part of stories that are about illness, okay? And I want to kind of narrow this down because this is too broad a thing for you to really kind of focus on, right? So the reason that we're focusing on one kind of form, which is the graphic form, is that it is through paying attention to the way that a story is told, the form of the story. It's by paying attention to the way the story is told that you confer singularity on the experience of illness, right? What distinguishes all of these kind of stories of illness, right? You can have, the graphic novel biography of Indira Gandhi's life has a one-page spread on Kamala Nehru's, experience of tuberculosis just before she goes to the Alps. But that's a one-page spread, right? In a novel that's largely about Indira Gandhi's life. So in all of these stories and in all of these kinds of ways of telling these stories, even though they are united by the sick and the dying and the elderly and those who care for them, and hospital encounters and doctors, what is it that you can really focus on and pay attention to and study in order to distinguish them? And here form really helps you focus on, why is this person choosing this way of narrating the story, right? Why are they choosing to tell the story in this way? And in that way, form confers singularity. And I want to give you some examples of that kind of singularity now, right? So we now then move into the form itself, which is the question of the graphic narrative. And this is the second part to my question of influence, right? So you have the broader field of, narrative medicine and the health humanities. You have the thematic, content of stories of this kind in general, whether or not they are illustrated in graphic form, right? What are stories about illness in general? You have the thematic considerations. And then here we're going to talk a little bit about the form itself, that is the specific form of a graphic storytelling, right? So the image I have up on screen, how many of you recognize it? Do you recognize this image by any chance? So this is an image from Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, and I have it up here because it gives you a very quick introduction into how the graphic form works, okay, in terms of just narrative sequencing. Okay, and I'm going to put a set of definitions down for you, but I thought that looking at the image is a very useful way of seeing how comics actually narrate a story. And for you to be able to see that the images organized in a sequential way tell a story in a very different way than the way that we are used to reading. Of course, these panels are very traditional in the sense that they go from left to right. No one is confusing you by moving panels out entirely and using the whole page to say something else. But it's a useful place to start, where there are a lot of different actions that are being completed from left to right, and the panels actually communicate that this is happening, right? So graphic narrative is sequential art. Okay, many of you may recognize them as comics, but you can also think of them broadly as sequential art, a kind of ordering and sequencing of story, right? So a narrativizing or ordering of the story through visuals and also text. And it can really be about anything, right? So it's not really that, graphics really tell stories about illness only. But that's also a thing that I wanted to push on a little bit, right? This meeting of the graphic and the medicine, and how we can kind of see that as working together. And I wanted to ask you guys if you can tell me what graphic novels you already know about. And maybe we can talk a little bit about the graphic novels you might know from India. Just because I want to talk a little bit about the utility of this kind of storytelling for illness and medicine, right? So is it a useful form? Does it make sense that someone would pick a graphic form in which to talk about illness? And for that, I think if you kind of remind yourselves of the graphic novels you know from India, then we can answer that question. Anyone? I was told that you all knew Hush, that you may have come across Hush in class. Not ringing a bell. Okay. Any others that you want to tell me about that anyone remembers? Oh, yeah, Kari, very good. Kari is a really good example to start with. Any others? Do you guys know Munnu? What about this side, that side? Yeah? So let's look at these three, right? What unites them? Very, very heavy duty themes, right? Very heavy themes. They are not in any sense close to any understanding of the comic, right? But your knowledge of Kari and your knowledge of Munnu, for those of you who remember Munnu, right? The experience of your military rule in Kashmir, your knowledge of this side, that side, stories about partition should tell you that the graphic novel is a vehicle for very, very heavy themes, very serious themes, right? So a recent history of the form, if you just look at the way that it has been used in India, but also the world over, right? Many of you might know Mouse, right? And the story of, and how here the visual form is used to tell this very brutal kind of history. So you can see that the form, in some sense, is very capable of carrying these difficult questions, okay? And, healthcare and experiences of healthcare involve suffering bodies. They involve a lot of pain. They involve a lot of discomfort and a lot of difficulty. And the graphic form in many ways comes in to be able to talk about this. But it has a history of doing that. is kind of, the point that I wanted to make here. So I have a graphic medicine, definition from 2007. So in 2007, you have this formal way in which, scholarship is contending with graphic medicine, and it's, understood as an intersection between the medium of comics and the discourse of healthcare. And there are some ways in which we can try and unpack this, which hopefully the examples we look at will allow us to do. And I wanted to show you another kind of, definition, which, can help us put all the things we talked about so far together. So if graphic medicine is the utilization of comics as a medium of storytelling to communicate things about healthcare, then we also have a very highly specialized form of graphic storytelling, which is the autopathography, or the autopathographic, okay, where someone tells the story of their own illness, and they are in some sense also the artist themselves, right? So it's like a graphic autobiography of someone who has suffered an illness experience. And there's an interesting, definition here that I wanted you to look at, where the autopathography allows you to translate biopathological time into autobiographical time. A very odd thing to say, I know, right? So what is biopathological time? You can think of biopathological time as an experience of time when your body has been interrupted by a pathological event. Okay, so you can think of it as being as simple as having a flu, right? Or it can be something more severe, like having an episode where you have lost consciousness or have been in the hospital, right? The kind of things people write about. And this biopathological event and the time that it takes is sometimes seen in the hospital very differently and experienced by the person very differently. So in the hospital, it might be recorded as a time when you were admitted, perhaps a time at which a diagnostic test was completed, and it could be the days you're counting down until you're actually released from the hospital, right? There might be a way in which you organize biopathological time. There might be a way that you organize the time there from the moment of finding the exact thing that's wrong with this person's body, and then once you have a date of the test or the date that the exam was conducted, right? They often make quite a big deal about how recently have you concluded this exam, right? Autobiographical time, however, is concerned with other kinds of things. What is the experience of the patient's family when they're rushing them to the hospital, right? Does the event of illness make everything else stop such that you're in the hospital and you're just getting treated and then you come back better? No. It actually puts your life into complete disarray and chaos, right? And it reorganizes your experience of life in such a way that time in the hospital expands in such a way that you experience it as a time that almost never ends, right? You can't wait to go back. So these stories actually play around a lot with the experience of time, how long something feels, how short something feels, how long it takes to understand something, right? In these ways, it kind of plays around with time when stories are narrated, right? So I wanted you to focus a little bit and think a little bit about the narrating of time in these stories. Okay? So how do we do that, right? How do we pay attention to time in the story, and how do we pay attention to the way in which these stories organize the experience of time? Because it's a difficult thing to get your head around, right? I have given a couple of conceptual ways of understanding this, which are not unique to graphic medicine. Typically, theorists who study form talk about things called structure and texture, okay? Which means that in the way that a story is being told, so all of you can think about how we have been discussing that all of us are aware of experiences of illness, and yet the way that each person might narrate it might differ. Someone might talk about it very humorously, right? And someone else might talk about it with a great deal of distress, but the kind of thing they're talking about might be common, right? And so here, when you're talking about the way of telling a story, that is essentially the form, you have something that can be thought of as structure and something that can be thought of as texture. Just think of structure as a matter of large-scale arrangement, right? So structure is anything that involves your memory in a story, right? So you have to remember where this person was born, what happened to them after that, then they moved somewhere, they got married, and then they got a job, and then, eventually this happens. So if you find yourself summarizing a novel, let's say, to someone, You have to rely on your memory for the structure. Where did it begin? What were the things that happened subsequently? The chronology, right? And that's a matter of structure, matter of large scale arrangement. Texture is a matter of immediacy, okay? And we'll get to texture in a bit. But I wanted to talk about how structure matters, right, in these stories. So, what I've written down here is a kind of schematic representation of how someone might structure or order a story of illness. Okay? Think of yourself as a Bollywood scriptwriter who's kind of, making a film about, say someone who's in love, but oh no, they have a brain tumor. You know these stories, right? So think of a way of representing that and a scheme for that narratively, which would look something like this, right? Maybe you start with the moment of diagnosis, and then you go to a successful diagnostic encounter, and then you have a coherent plan for medical management. Someone tells you, oh, this is what you have to do, and then you have a restoration of health, right? Is this normally how things work in a story of illness? Can are there ways of rearranging this? So for the story perspective, there are ways of rearranging this where I could start with someone who's in a very great state of health, and then they go back and they say, oh, actually I had a very dark year last year and things weren't great, right? So you can play around with these elements, but you can also question each component of this scheme. It is possible that someone gets sick and never gets better. Yeah, that's what happens in the story that you'll read this afternoon. It's possible someone goes to the hospital and then becomes ill because of that medical, whatever, being, admitted in the hospital is actually the source of some of your trouble. So the medical encounter need not be the source or, in some sense, solution for what you're experiencing. So the structuring of stories of illness often question what are some of these core elements of stories about illness, right? So you have themes that are present as kernel narratives, but the structuring of the story will often be done in such a way so as to question each of these moments, right? Is the medical diagnosis actually helpful, right? Is having a diagnosis actually helpful to me? Does it help me understand what's wrong with me? And many of the writers who write stories about their own experiences of illness might disagree and say that it doesn't help them, right? Often the medical encounter is a very disruptive one. It's a very shocking one, right? And so that's also something that these narratives really focus on. Okay. So just to give you a sense of how that happens, I have a picture here from Kalki Koechlin's The Elephant in the Womb. I don't know how many of you know this story or you know of this graphic novel. Have any of you come across it? Do you guys know who Kalki Koechlin is though? Right? So this along with a few other I think Kareena Kapoor also has a story about her experience with motherhood. It's not a graphic novel, but this, along with Kareena Kapoor's story and another one, is studied together as a way in which celebrities are coming forward, speaking about experiences of motherhood and participating in some public discourse about healthcare for women. So I brought this for you as an example of showing you how structuring works, right? So we're looking at this in order to try and understand how, through the structure of a story, someone might question various components here and order the story very differently. So I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that here in Koechlin's account of her experience of being a mother, right? That's what the story is about. What I found compelling was that she starts her story about how she became pregnant with the abortions that she had. Right? So she organizes the story not by the moment of her child's birth and when she first found out. Rather, she puts it along a sequence of events that kind of had begun many years ago. So you can see on these panels, you have 2016, and in 2016, she is holding, a pregnancy test and she says that decides to have an abortion. And then you have 2019, in which she decides that she wanted to be a mother. So a different way of organizing this story about when I became a mother, where you call upon something that is very unusual. Most people wouldn't think to call upon an earlier moment where you had become unsuccessful in some sense to a moment in which you are finally, starting on this journey of, having a baby. So while this story is about motherhood, you can think of other stories that, talk about someone who has been diagnosed with an illness. If pregnancy is not a medical condition in the same way that being diagnosed with a tumor is, But you can substitute this for a story with, say, when you got diagnosed with cancer, tuberculosis, and you find in these stories that people often problematize the moment of origin. Many of these writers, because they are using informal modes of representation, won't really go with, okay, here is my CT scan, here is my X-ray. Rather, you go back to that moment of, actually, my family carried this generational curse, right? And they kind of go back and talk about the ways in which, you're already feeling like, in some sense, things are awry. Okay. So it's important in these stories to look at where the account or where the story about illness actually begins. It very rarely begins the way it begins in a hospital, which is with the moment of diagnosis or the moment of presenting illness. Okay. Another example I have for you is from something called Mai. Have you come across Mai? So Mai is the story of Malvika Shriram. It's not an autopathography. It is more a graphic biography, I would say, right? Because Malvika Iyer hasn't drawn it herself. It has been drawn by someone else who is representing life events in Malvika's life. Uh, so I'll tell you briefly the story of Malvika Iyer. So Malvika Iyer is a disability rights activist who lost both her hands in a bomb explosion. What had happened was that Malvika lived as a child in Bikaner, and in Bikaner there was a fire accident in a arms depot near her house, and the arms depot exploded, and a lot of hand grenades ended up getting distributed in a civilian neighborhood, and the army came and tried to pick up a lot of the ammunition, which was still live ammunition, hand grenades, but they didn't get all of them. So one hand grenade ended up getting, stored in Malvika's, family home, and she didn't know that that's what it was. She was a 12-year-old girl, and she kind of uses it one day to, to put to paste some sequence into her jeans, right? Something as inconsequential as that. She needed a hard object to paste something on her jeans pocket, and she picks up this hand grenade, bangs on the jeans pocket a couple of times from the other side where the pin is not there, and then one day she inverts it, not knowing that it's a grenade, and then it explodes in her hand, and she loses both hands, or immediately they're shattered. And because she's crouching, she also has all the bones in her legs have shattered, and so it's a horrific kind of experience which is detailed in a graphic form. Therefore the form is really true to that context of being very graphic. And it tells us the story of how she was rehabilitated, right? What were all the experiences that she had, and how was she rehabilitated? Now notice how I told you the story, right? Many of you had expressions that went slowly from partially kind of listening in and then becoming truly horrified. But this her story in the graphic novel interestingly starts here, right? Very innocuously, when she is a schoolgirl. So when you open the book, what you see is not Malvika as you can see her now if you Google her, which is without her without her arms, and she's successfully finished her PhD in social work, and she sort of does fashion for the disabled, right? And so she's a very kind of public, very visible figure. But how you see her at the start of the story is also as a young child having a good time in school. The story situates her in that context before taking you through the experience that happened, right? So it's definitely a story about what happened to her, the accident, and it's also a story about the medical management of that accident. But it, starts at a point where you see her as someone other than a disabled individual, someone other than a victim of an accident. Okay. So, and I thought we could talk a little bit about texture as well, right? So texture is more a matter of impressionism or smaller scale. So this is not a overall arrangement of the story. It's what might hit you on a particular page, a non-repeating phenomena in the text. You don't have to rely on memory, but you can think of it in a graphic novel as a full page spread about something, where you may have had panels sequencing the story for some time, but you suddenly have a full page spread which arrests your attention and focuses you on that image at that moment, right? What are some kinds of things that are textural elements of such stories, right? What do you texture such stories with? Healthcare encounters are a very big part of the texture of any kind of visual stories of this kind, right? Even if you think back on your medical dramas, which really foreground the hospital scenario, right? Someone coming in, someone being wheeled in, and then that very kind of crisis situation which is managed. So that encounter with healthcare is a very big sort of textural element. And then another obvious textural element is the ailing body, right? So the diseased body itself, the person who's suffering, the person who's having an ailment, that itself is also a very big textural element. And I thought we could look at a couple of examples of these. What do the healthcare encounters typically do, and how do they use the visual form to show you what all is happening in the healthcare encounter? Here are a couple of examples of this, right? And these are also studied. These are also commented upon frequently. Look at the panel on the left to start with, right? So on the left, you have a series of panels in which Kalki Koechlin is actually meeting a doctor to discuss how her pregnancy will be managed. Okay, it's a meeting for this plan, and she has titled it "What is Standard Procedure." So you can see standard procedure is in bold and kind of framed and laminated. And what you can observe about this are almost always, in most stories like this, are the differences in the facial expressions that the doctors have and then the way that the patient is shown. Either you have this kind of a situation where this is from Mai, where Mai is actually being told by the doctor. So in the second panel, I'm not sure if you can read, she is waiting to go through this very painful procedure where small shards of the bomb that kind of got into her skin are debrided and taken out every day. So every day someone has to come and squeeze out little bits of the fragment from her legs, and it's enormously painful, but that's the treatment. And so here in this panel, the doctor says in his speech bubble, looking very placid, right? Look at the placid expression of the doctor, the professional placid expression. This situation is under control, right? That's what that person's expression says. And he says, "Hello, good morning, how are you?" Right? And she's thinking, surely that's a trick question. Because by now this is routine. It has happened every day, right? And so here she's talking about how it can't be that this person is greeting me, because this is not a greeting kind of situation. It's a situation in which for several days now, I have encountered debilitating pain because of the kind of treatment that I have to go through. So there is almost always in the medical encounter a lot that is going on. It's never that the person is meeting a doctor and just kind of telling them what's wrong and the doctor's kind of listening to them. Like your medical films division documentaries of old, where you have a doctor with a white coat and someone comes and then they're comfortably told that, following this treatment will mean that you get better. Here you have something else that's going on, right? There's a certain distance that's there between the patient and the doctor. If you can see the second set of panels in Kalki Koechlin's memoir, you can see that she is trying to say that she wants to breastfeed, but the nurse has taken the baby away, is not making eye contact with her, and she says, no, it's just standard procedure, and she's feeding the baby formula. So there are 4 instances, or 3 instances in which no one is really listening to what she wants. The medical procedure, the standard procedure is just going on. And the panels communicate that just through how the facial expressions are communicated and the bodies are positioned. No one is actually talking to one another. It's not a conversation. You remember the image we started with? These are not conversations, right? These are people actually talking at cross purposes, almost like a non sequitur. I want to feed my baby. Oh, here's formula for the baby, right? And so nothing meaningful is happening in these encounters. So it's really a criticism, right, of the fact that when you first encounter a doctor or a hospital, how can it look? Comics like these, or instances, textural instances like this, when the focus is on the doctor's expression and the nurse's expression, are actually used in medical classrooms as a way of teaching doctors that how you present yourself to someone in a moment of panic is very important, right? So comics are also used as a way of training. These situations in comics are used as a way of training doctors to think about how panic is something that informs a person when they, first meet you, and how you present yourself to them is therefore important, right? Okay. So I move on to my last segment, and I have here an image that, I wanted to show you from The Elephant in the Womb. I don't know how many of you would recognize it. Do you recognize this? So this is definitely not Kalki Koechlin, right? It doesn't look like her, because you guys said that you knew her. It doesn't look like Kalki Koechlin, right? So who is this? This is from The Elephant in the Womb. Notice that it is titled The Host. Someone says, how the hell does nature ensure the survival of the species when this is such torture, right? And at the end, it says, before I got pregnant, I had a vague idea that one has to rest in the first trimester and that it is a sensitive time. But nobody told me to prepare for an alien invasion that would turn my insides out and transform me into a human incubating system of toxic gases and chemical imbalances. Okay, that's what she says. But do you recognize the image though? Do you know where it's from, or is it before your time? It's from a a science fiction, a horror science fiction thriller called Alien, in which you have this thing that's called a chest burster, right? So it's basically a group of people in an alien, spaceship that's sent there for exploration, come across an alien colony. And these aliens are hostile to the humans being there. And the way that they kind of invade your body is actually by clamping onto your head, and then they manage to, in some sense, impregnate you. It not in the sense that Kalki Koechlin means it, but they manage to have a parasitical entry of this alien organism in someone's body, right? Very odd comparison to make. Okay, the reason that the image I chose here was to show you how much the image actually works against what you would think about the condition, right? And that's work that the graphic narrative normally does. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what Ian Williams calls in graphic medicine or in graphic narratives, the manifest, the concealed, and the visible, right? He says that authors of illness experience, right, use a visual iconography. And you can think of a visual iconography in many different ways. You can think of a visual iconography, as we did in the beginning, as something that is an informal way of representing disease. You can say that this is just a creative visualizing, an artist visualizing how disease looks and how it feels to them, right? You can also think of visual iconography as a certain mental storehouse of images that a writer has. It could be borrowed from the films they watch. It could be borrowed from the kind of, maybe art that they're interested in. There are a lot of stylistic influences in artists as well who are drawing comics, right? So you can think of it as a certain storehouse of mental images. And I want to talk a little bit about what Koechlin's storehouse of images are. And you can also think of visual iconography as trying to say something that is typically not seen or heard, or not a very, say, normal way of understanding, say, a particular condition in public life, right? So the manifest, the concealed, and the invisible are three kinds of things that a graphic artist can do when they're representing illness. You can draw something that is manifest. So Kalki Koechlin in her memoir draws herself as, having, a baby bump, right? And that's a certain manifest way of talking about what you're experiencing, okay? It's manifest. I mean, she draws herself in, various ways where she's holding the baby, or she's actually, has a small baby bump. And these are manifest ways in which you can, show the illness. You might have stitches, right? You might have stitches or a wound. And those are things which are manifestly representable, right, in the image. But you can also represent something that is concealed, right? And what does that mean? So one kind of example Ian Williams gives is the example of someone that has an STD, right? Like herpes, where they say that it's actually a big burden for you mentally because you constantly feel like you're giving out these contagious, sort of vibes to everybody, right? And so he says that comics which are about people experiencing symptoms that don't physically show, right? You use the graphic medium to actually make them visible. So you can show something that is otherwise concealed using the image. Okay? You can also show something that's just invisible. And so in this case, I wanted you to think a little bit about what she's showing. This is definitely not something that's manifest. Her baby was not an alien, meaning now we know the end of that story because her baby is, born and alive and healthy and well. And we know that it was not an alien parasite. So she's not showing us something that's manifest. But she is showing us something that's concealed and invisible. talking about the anxieties of being a new mother. Anxiety has been visualized in this way, right? Feeling like you have no control over your body. How do you show that? How do you show that through an image, right? How do you make someone think about the fact that pregnancy is not always something that is an experience of joy and an experience of rest? But how do you rest when your body actually feels like it's been invading? And then there are various other kinds of politics going on here about the representation of motherhood, which I won't get into. But I'll also leave it to you to think about how disruptive it is to say that as a mother, I felt like I was turned into a host and then my baby was a parasite, right? Which is really something that is a very disruptive image to build of the mother. So I want to kind of, end with that, right? Where I want to show you how the graphic narrative doesn't just tackle difficult subjects, but actually disrupts a visual lexicon, right? What is it doing? I mean, the graphic narrative about illness is creating iconography, creating images about illness that really pushes against the kind of images you might already have, that you might already be saturated with, a certain visual lexicon for, health that might exist in your mind. So I've just made like, collage here, but you can make a larger collage if you wish to see how the narratives you read, what is it that they're pushing against? So to see what she's pushing against, I have a scene from Alien where, the alien, her chest bursting is actually happening. I couldn't find one with Sigourney Weaver, but you can find them online. And then I have a poster from the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare about mom's health and about making sure to test yourself for HIV so as to not affect your baby. Notice the way that the mother is drawn and the baby is drawn. And then I have an image from advertisements for, the Motherhood group of hospitals. It's a very big hospital chain in India where they do a lot of advertising about maternal health. And so there are a lot of images about maternal health. But surely you guys have seen mothers selling everything from water purifiers to like detergents to anything. Any situation in which an icon has to communicate the idea of care, the idea of concern, or the idea of someone who can really care for you selflessly, you can use the mother icon, right? Is this making sense about the visual iconography? So I put this together to show you how Ketchlin's image is working and pushing against something. And so I'll conclude this section about, image and voice, where imaging and voicing, illness is really about expressing dissatisfaction with how you're seen, understood, and heard in the context of healthcare experience, right? So the graphic form allows you to show what is concealed. What did I not get to say in that medical encounter? Did someone meet me and then keep a placid expression and say, well, this is standard procedure, it's all fine? And then in that encounter, did I feel dissatisfied? Did I feel like something was not really going right? There was something else that could have been expressed. There's a certain re-articulating of diagnostic images that happens. So a lot of graphic narratives are very interesting in the way that they also interrupt formal medical images. So you will notice even in the story you're reading for this afternoon that she actually draws a lot of very medical images, right? A picture of a mother's brain, and then you have a picture of, a colostomy bag. And so you have ways in which the artist themselves is kind of redrawing, re-articulating these diagnostic images. Why do they do that, right? Why do they do that if not to say that looking at that particular image and interpreting it is not necessarily the same experience for the patient as it is for the doctor? There are also ways in which these forms of engagement are decidedly outside the institution, right? That the lexicon of images is actually moving you away from the medical institution. So if you look at these images here, while I don't have images for you of maternal health as it is depicted in a film, say a popular blockbuster film that you might watch or an advertisement that you might see, while I don't have those images here, you can see that the lexicon actually takes you away from the medical site and into the cultural saturation of images that we all have. So even in Elephant in the Womb, and even in the story that you read this afternoon, you will see that the discussion doesn't only center on the diagnostic experience alone. There are certain dissatisfaction or there are certain criticisms made about what it means to meet someone in the hospital and not become aware of what it is that you struggle with. But at the same time, the story takes you outside that location and into a larger sort of milieu in which, the definition and understanding of it looks very different, right? And what is it that happens outside the institution? One example I have here is the work of recovery. So the My story, a lot of My's story is about the work of recovery that has to happen outside the hospital. So in the hospital, all that really happens is that she has surgery. She is fitted with, prosthetic arms, and she's sent home. But at this point, she was in middle school. At this point, she was in high school, about to write her board exams, missed a year of school, and has to then train herself to write again, because she has to kind of be able to use her prosthetic hands. And so a lot of that work of restoring health is really where the novel takes you, rather than staying in the medical institution alone. And other determinants of health are an object of focus as well, that takes you away from the site of the medical, right? So you have a lot of focus on what are the other kinds of things that contribute to someone's lack of well-being. You don't see it in Mai so much, but you see it a great deal with Kalki Koechlin's story, and you also see it a great deal with the story that we'll be reading later today, where there are a lot of questions asked about what has already disabled this person environmentally, culturally, that then, does not permit as fast a recovery or as good a feeling of wellness as is possible, right? Okay, that's all I have. So I'm going to stop here, and these were my examples for you of how you can focus on certain elements of the text and use certain reading strategies. So if you guys have any questions, comments, I think, do we have some time for that? Yeah.
Thanks. That was fascinating. I'll start off since no one's let them kind of think of. So I was wondering, because the graphic novel involves so much of the spatial and the temporal. There is the chronos as there is the space, right? And obviously, I'm thinking about kind of the medical kind of, and there is also a lot in memory. As you mentioned, autopathography. So there's a lot of remembering, and I saw the kind of thought bubbles and the speech bubbles there. So I was wondering, how do you think that the graphic novel medium kind of engages with the spatial and temporal, especially in terms of medical humanities? Is it kind of a little more uniquely placed than maybe a purely textual medium? And the second thing that I observed, and this might just be totally coincidental, is that all the images that you showed are all in black and white.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, because there is, again, when we understand comics,
Yeah.
a lot of splash of color, and also in graphic novels, different kinds. So is that kind of just coincidental, or is that a kind of a running theme in medical comics with kind of which deal with illness and kind of disability?
Thanks. So I think that, to start with, if we kind of go back to the question of the spatial and, the temporal, it's difficult, I think, with a very small corpus to make broad statements about, that within medicine alone there are differences. But I think that's why for the spatial and the temporal, I gave you the instance of the medical institution and the medical encounter as being very central to stories of illness, and also the way that the person's suffering is articulated, the way that the physical form kind of is shown to progress with or work with the event of illness. So really what you have in the graphic form, I think, is the ability to articulate things that otherwise would not have been possible in the same page. So, people have often talked about, maybe I can show you this. So people have often talked about how there is a certain uniqueness in the graphic form being able to show you something in a synchronic way. That is, even though it shows you the movement of time in some sense, it's available to you in the same page, right? And much vaster quantities of time can be communicated. So in our afternoon story, if you remember the first page actually is it's possible that it is communicating something about a much vaster quantity of time. It could very well be that someone is kind of starting to tell a story about how they heard that someone was admitted in the hospital, and then many years passed, and then at the end you have what is the end of a single page. And the graphic form is unique in being able to compress that time and show it, represent it in that synchronic way, even though it's a very diachronic spread of what the events themselves are. So I think that's one kind of unique way in which the graphic form would, narrate what is going on. I would say that fictional stories, otherwise, about illness, also play around a great deal with time, because time and the moment of, diagnosis is a very disputed element in stories of illness. And so, the whole kind of idea about who you are as a person defined as, experiencing this illness is often something that you kind of go back to and relocate outside of just the diagnostic documents that are handed to you. So people always go back and rely on memory. Often you can't rely on your own memory. So these are also narratives which are very tentative about memory. So in graphic form, you can explain that quite beautifully, because you have a very kind of big distance that's created between where I heard this story about the person that I'm talking about, right? Or there are suddenly photographs that appear, and then other kinds of medical documents as well, and they're all arranged side by side. And then you have some kind of narration about how, I heard that she was admitted on this day, but I don't really know what happened between this and that day. So there's a lot of also gaps and silences in what really happened and who's doing the talking, right? Regarding color, though, it just so happens that so Mai is entirely rendered in black and white. The Elephant in the Room works a little bit with that shade of baby pink, and actually uses that as an aesthetic choice in order to show that, she had a girl, and then, she has, the book itself is very, specially designed in the sense that it has small section for you to make notes. You're supposed to be reading it as an expectant mother yourself, right? So she has some empty pages for you to make notes about your own experiences. There's a chapter that's drawn by her partner, which is in a very different style than the rest of the book. So usually they're very eclectic mixes, and they're not always necessarily in black and white, but color is an important aesthetic consideration when it becomes something that's a part of the story. So I don't have an example for you from India, but then if you know Cancer Vixen, okay, for those of you who want to look up Cancer Vixen actually uses that aesthetic of the comic strip and kind of maintains that aesthetic throughout the novel, and really uses bright splashes of color in order to show that, the person who narrates the story really builds an identity for herself as a high society lady who refused to be bogged down by cancer, right? It's not going to get me down. So the aesthetic of the book itself then very much works with that color palette. And she talks a little bit about the public life of women in New York and how they're always dressed up in wearing stilettos and wearing these, clothes which are meant for women who are very thin. So there's a bit of that commentary as well about the culture of fashion in New York and being immersed in it. And then that allows her to talk a little bit about, how a mastectomy is not really, very sensitive to the person who is being diagnosed. But their color makes, it's an interpretative decision because it's something that's been used. But in these examples I showed you, color was not an important aesthetic consideration in the interpretation of it. So therefore I looked much more at other kinds of things like expressions and the way that people are, sort of placed in a panel, the posturing there, those kinds of things were what we looked at more. But it is very possible, depending on the choice, to look at color too.
Any more questions, comments? Yes.
Hello, ma'am. It has been such a nice presentation so far. I had just one question. I was wondering if the graphic novels being such a visual medium, how do you think it intersects with Foucault's idea of the medical case? Does it agree with it? Does it combat it?
Okay.
What?
Yeah, I think you can, I think, have another question and then I'll respond to them together.
Hi, thank you for that really interesting introduction to how to read graphic medicine. No, I was looking at the page that you have on the screen from Mai. And in the beginning, you were talking about how there is like a conventional structure of panels that you read from left to right and all of that. And in the last panel, you have a moment of pain that kind of disrupts what has been going on
Yeah.
the page so far. So we often talk about pain as something that is really difficult to represent. So I was wondering how um, the texts that you read, how they fashion ways of showing that.
Okay. Okay, both really nice questions. With the medical gaze, um, so I've been thinking about this a little bit from the perspective of um, who consumes these novels, right? So if you'll allow me to answer it in that way, I think that this question really takes us to who is it that the communication is being done for, and then who does the communicating, right? I would say that, looking at the way that the scholarship around the graphic novel has evolved in, say, health humanities and medical humanities, there's a lot of interest in how the comics medium can show you ways of understanding what the patient is kind of going through in a medical encounter, but it's really targeting a medical professional. These are all part of curriculum discussions for, say, a medical degree program, right? So there's a certain, I think, appropriation there of what the conversation is here, and to always try and bring it back to the field of medicine and say, okay, now I want to expand my lexicon within the field of medicine of how it is that I understand what a patient is going through. So there's a certain, I think, desire there to, to kind of really enhance and make this field of knowledge even bigger, without necessarily giving that control that the narrative here seeks for the patient's voice and the patient itself. So I would say that, the novels themselves, the way that I'm reading them in this way, looking at voice and looking at the disruption caused by the image, I think that kind of allows you to, or is trying to get you to move outside of that very formal epistemic understanding of what are the components, what are the kind of identifiable empirical components into which I can break this body down, versus other kinds of things that can be visualized and then can be communicated, which is also what allows me to talk about pain a little bit, right? So the question about pain is interesting because in Ketchlin's memoir, she actually has, again, a very different kind of a style of drawing just for the time that she's admitted to the hospital before she's about to give birth. So that entire sequence is actually drawn in a very different style. It's all completely black and inked out, and you can see no light. Very bizarre, right? Like you don't have that highly exposed white light kind of environment of the hospital. Instead, it's fully dark, and a kind of she chooses to have a water birth. She has a doula, and I mean, this is naturally also someone with a lot of access to be able to dictate how you have birth. So I mean, how you give birth. But what is interesting there is that she has one sort of spread in the middle of this sequence where she draws herself going through these contractions and the pain caused by them. And she draws it very much like a sort of snake that's snaking through her body. Again, a very informal representation of how it feels. But for me, because I have a visual lexicon of my own of graphic narratives, it reminded me of exactly the way that David B. represents epilepsy in his graphic novel Epileptic, which is again drawn in black and white. But there's a very distinct iconography of illness that's created there, where he talks about epilepsy as following his brother around like a shadow, and sometimes like a snake, and sometimes as something that snakes through his body, because he's wanting to represent the convulsions and the kind of full body experience that the fit causes to his brother, and therefore draws it in this style. And so I found that, this artist, Ketchlin works with this other artist, right? So I felt like perhaps she had borrowed from that kind of style of drawing. That's I think, a harder thing to both argue and also think about, which is why I didn't have additional images for you here. But there are a lot of, if some of you are thinking about the India question, because what we have here really is a set of texts from India, one of them perhaps only dodgily so, right, with Ketchlin, because I mean, I feel like it has to be said, right? I don't know which of our other celebrities would have been able to speak so openly against a certain image of motherhood, and her sort of citizenship status gives her that, I suppose. But if you want to ask the India question, there are interesting repositories online that I can sort of share with Atul for you, where there is some interest in folk art in India and how it represents health. There again, you have images and you have a certain approach, a visual approach to health and storytelling about health. It's not sequential art, but it's very interesting representations of the body, very interesting ways of visualizing certain kinds of folk figures. So one kind of figure I wanted to add to this lexicon I have at the end, to this one especially, is a picture of the chudel, right? So you have this, do you guys know what a chudel is? You've heard about the chudel? So there is this very fascinating sort of series of Madhubani paintings and folk traditions in which the chudel is represented, and the chudel is actually known as someone who comes back to actually taunt or punish the people who did her harm or did her wrong in her own life, and they often actually come up in contexts of difficult childbirth. So these are often also women who have died during childbirth or who have had stillborn children and have then had a lot of difficulty in their life, or have been harmed because they could not get pregnant. And so that's a source for the way that the chudel is actually presented. And you have a very monstrous, so this kind of monstrous image that you see here, right, it's not necessarily only borrowed from a Western pop culture aesthetic. There is a location for an aesthetic of a monstrous woman image within Indian folk art also, if you want to think about that. I didn't have too much there, and so I didn't bring you that context, but I can share the reference with Atul for all of you to look at if you're interested in looking at it much more.